Ooh, today we're looking at the top 3. We got the new decks here. It's a new decks of the week. What's going on, everybody? Booty, buttocks, cheeks. Somebody once told me that every time I say new decks of the week, they think booty, buttocks, cheeks, and it's stuck with me now. So I think it every time I do the theme song. What is going on, everybody? It has been 6 days since Spooderman hit standard, and no one's playing standard. And all that. So, but I know that I still like doing new decks of the week's videos, especially if we have new decks that week. And we actually do. You would think that Spider-Man wouldn't affect standard like that much, but it turns out that Spider-Man through the Omenpaths is doing a little bit of work. None of these decks are taking over standard at the moment, save for maybe one that's doing really, really well. But, you know, we do have some decks that are showing up in League 5.0s, often multiple times, and even in the top 16s or 8s of challenges. So let's cover some of these today, starting with an oldie but a goodie. This is Monowhite lifegain right here, which you may have seen on the arena, starting with Halia Guided by Light last season in EOE standard. But it turns out that in Spider-Man standard, we got the card that really makes this an actual deck, and it's Aunt May, also known as Zora Spider Fancier or Fancier of Spiders or something like that, over on Through the Omenpaths. Amazingly, we are playing a 4 of the legendary Aunt May. And I don't mean that as a superlative, like she's literally legendary. Within the Magic rules, that is her subtype. And even though she is legendary, we're still going to play the playset that gives us 12 things between this, Hinterland Sanctifier, and KC Uneaten Feast that all give us a life whenever a creature comes into play under our side. This deck really craves this effect on turn 1. And with 12 ways to get it, we'll almost never be without it. And we'll often have 2 versions of the effect on the table at the same time, which is also really good. Why not more? More is better in a deck like this. You know, it'll make our Ajani's Pride Mates larger if we have more of these things out at the same time. Our Essence Channelers, our Exemplar of Light set is 10 ways to, you know, play Ajani's Pride Mate effects, basically, in format right now. We don't need all 4 Exemplars. It's a little bit expensive for the deck, kind of top-heavy. And also, it doesn't trigger Enduring Innocence. Neither does Halia Guided by Light. You can't play too many creatures that don't trigger Innocence. But it's worth noting that between Enduring Innocence as a 4 of, Halia Guided by Light as a 4 of, and Exemplar of Light as a 2 of, you have 10 cards in your monocolored aggro deck that draw cards. And that's not unheard of, but it is pretty good. It's nothing wrong with that. We're drawing a lot of cards in this deck when it comes down to it. There's also a Basri Tomorrow's Champion in the creature suite here. Just another 1-drop. Why not play 13 1-drops in your deck that's trying to get on board as quickly as possible? This deck also likes cheap creatures because you can double spell more easily, thus gaining more life off of Aunt May or Halia or whatever. Hinterland Sanctifier, KC Uneaten Feast. We actually have 12 different ways, 4 apart from just the 1-drop slot, of, you know, having this sort of Lunarch Veteran Soul's Attendant effect in standard right now. We're playing the full complement playsets of every single one of them because they are just the best cards in our deck. And I think Aunt May pushing this deck into prominence on MTGO League really helps to make that argument. Because even though Halia Guided by Light, mono white builds were kind of popping off on the arena last season, especially in Best of 1, we really didn't see a whole lot of activity in Best of 3 and MTGO Leagues where you have to get 5 wins in a row at the very least. But now this deck has shown up twice this week already, which is pretty amazing. This list is by Artur Costa, 7th place in an MTGO challenge. So not just a 5-0 deck. This is actually a top 8 MTGO challenge deck. It's our honorable mention this week, really. I don't know that I'd mentioned that yet, but it's our HM this week because I think everyone kind of knows this deck. And again, oldie but a goodie. It's always trying, scratching, clawing to be a real deck in standard. But I think that it has started to prove this season that it is just that. And you have to take it a little more seriously than you would have, you know, 2 months or 6 months or 2 years ago. But there's other stuff in this deck. You know, we've got Battle Menu in here, which can gain us some life at instant speed. And that is really good for growing Pride Mates, Channelers, whatever, on blocks or when they get blocked or whatever. But this can also destroy a creature power 4 or greater. It can create a 2/2 creature token at flash speed. More on why we want to do that later. But altogether, just a solid removal spell that also does multiple other things the deck wants to do. Sheltered by Ghost is amazing in mono white lifegain as well because we can throw it on a Pride Mate or a Channeler. And now them having lifelink is good because they get to like 7 or 8 power really fast. But also, you know, they'll trigger themselves when they deal any kind of damage. So that's pretty nice. But there's also a kind of KO punch in here. Elspeth Stormslayer as a very, very late game drop. So this can create soldiers on its own, 2 at a time. So it's good for playing through sweepers, which the deck is typically really, really bad at. You know, we're trying to regurgitate our hand onto the table. We're really not, you know, we're not trying to not overcommit in this deck. You know, we need as much value as quickly as possible. So Sweeper's just body us. Elspeth's good against those. But this also can put a flying counter on the Essence Channeler or the Pride Mate. A lot harder in just mono white to lose life on your turn to give the Channeler Pride, or the Channeler Pride Mate? The Channeler flying. Because, you know, we don't have access to Caves of Koilos or anything anymore. So we're going to use Elspeth to give it flying. We're going to use Elspeth to give it Johnny's Pride Mate flying, get in for the win. So I like that about it. But Elspeth also doubles our tokens off of battle menu and a couple of other things in the deck, at least one other thing that we'll get to when we get to the mana base. But all things considered, I just like this as kind of a form of late game reach that we can knock them out with a Pride Mate with flying or something, or we can play the long game against blue-white control and other decks that pack a lot of sweepers if we can land the Elspeth in the first place. Elspeth also really good with Enduring Innocence, drawing a card every turn. There's a lot of good reasons to play the Elspeth in the deck. When we get to the lands, there's 22. Even though there's 5 and 4 drops in the deck, we're only on 22 lands. It's because the deck draws a fair number of cards for reasonably cheap too. So you really only have to have like 3 lands to get the card draw engine going, and that will get you your 4th and 5th lands. We're playing Fountain Port because we don't have like lay down arms or anything that, you know, counts the number of planes that we have. So we basically get 4 at least free slots for colorless lands. Fountain Port's great. This draws more cards, makes more tokens with Elspeth, all that stuff. When we get to the sideboard, we see the Authority of the Consoles you might expect to see in the main deck in Best of 1 on Arena. It always is, but relegated to the board here. Great card. Even Interrupter to counter sweepers and other big spells that would just win the game. You know, Devout Decree in here to blow up, you know, black and red creatures and planeswalkers. Exiles them too. Elspeth Smite for a, you know, low rent removal spell, and Seam Ripper's in here too. Mostly against mono red decks that play a lot of cheap threats like we do. Requisition Raid will take out artifacts and enchantments, or Anthem our team, not bad. Glass Casket draws a card off of Halia. That's probably why it's here. Ghost Vacuum does the same thing, but this also is basically in every sideboard in the whole world. So yeah, Voice of Victory is in here against the blue-white decks, and also will gain us a lot of life when it mobilizes too, if we have enough of these, like, you know, Soul's Attendant effects in play. But it's also decent with an Elspeth out because it'll make, you know, a bunch of mobilized tokens when it gets in. So that's nice. Yeah. Altogether, not going to spend all the time in the world on this deck, although I feel like I kind of already have. 7.5 minutes into this video. How did that happen? But Mono White is an exciting deck to some and a groaning deck to others. So it's kind of our honorable mention this week. But I did want to bring it up because I think that, you know, if nothing else, even if you don't like the deck, you have to take it seriously. I'll repeat myself there. You now have to acknowledge this is kind of a real deck in Standard. 7th place in a challenge is no joke. But let's get on to our number 3 deck of the week. This is Grixis Ardyn. This is by E.S. Waff. But this is just one version of the deck that is 5-0'd this week. The deck is also placed in challenges. It got like 18th to the best of my knowledge, but hasn't, you know, gotten an amazing finish in a challenge that I can recall having seen through, you know, the research. But again, this deck has been pretty decent in League this week, and I wanted to bring it up. It's Ardyn the Usurper. So this came out in Final Fantasy, and you probably remember mostly what this does. Beginning of combat on your turn, you get a creature from your graveyard, you get a token that's a copy of it, but it's a 5/5 black demon. And demons you control have menace, lifelink, haste. Pretty good, you know. But Ardyn is a nice little reanimation piece that can get stuff out of your graveyard, actually make it larger, give it keyword abilities. All that is great. So interesting reanimation engine rather than a reanimation spell, but usually it starts by reanimating the Ardyn in the first place. Now, the new card in this deck is Superior Spider-Man here. This is 4 mana, 2 blue, black for a 4/4 legendary spider human hero. This is also known as Cavero, Mind Bitten on the arena and through the Omenpaths. So this has Mind Swap. You can have it enter the battlefield as a copy of any creature card in any graveyard, except his name is whatever his name is, Superior Spider-Man in this case. And he's a 4/4 spider human hero in addition to his other types. When you do, exile that card. This is a reason that they might not be able to actually reprint through the Omenpaths into Standard, because now you can kind of have 2 copies of this card, right? Like one of in Commander, like one of them will be Superior Spider-Man, the other one will be Cavero. They have different names. You see what I'm saying? But anyway, that's completely beside the point. We've got stuff like Fear of Missing Out in here to discard cards. Overlord of the Bale Merc will mill cards. Steam Core Scholar will discard cards. Terrace of Light Shatter will discard cards. But you note that all of these will keep us relatively aggressive. You know, we're not looking at necessarily too many 1, 2, 3 mana spells that discard cards and put more cards in our hand or give us treasure tokens. Nothing like that. We're putting bodies on the table when we discard cards. That's really important. When it comes to FOMO, this can help an Ardyn or a Spider-Man or, a big creature, let's just say. Swing twice in a turn. And if they have like Menace and Lifelink, that is fantastic because you have the Ardyn, right? So fear of missing out is wonderful in this deck, but so is basically all this stuff that lets us draw, discard, filter stuff into our yard. We've got Valgavoth Terror Eater, and here is another big, like, quote, reanimation target. Our real reanimation spell in the deck is Superior Spider-Man. So, like, we use Superior Spider-Man to copy an Ardyn in our yard, and then that will let us, take the Ardyn out of our yard because it has a different name than the Superior Spider-Man. Which I think is actually a really neat little interaction. You target the Ardyn in your yard, turn Superior Spider-Man into a copy of Ardyn with Superior Spider-Man as its name. And then if you have a second copy of Ardyn, you can get that out with Superior Spider-Man's new ability that lets him do that during your combat step. So it's a cute little interaction, but mostly you'll turn it into an Ardyn, and then during your combat step, you'll get Valgavoth or something out of your yard. So pretty cool, again, interaction there. We've got Winter Night Stories to draw and discard, Bitter Triumph to discard cards and be a premium removal spell. Torch the Tower is a small ball removal spell, and even Prof's Eidetic Memory because Steam Core Scholar, Tersa Light Shatter, Fear of Missing Out, we're drawing cards. Winter Night Stories, we're drawing cards in this deck. So you see a little bit of the VV base in blue-red here. These cards are just powerful to go, enough to go in a lot of different decks. When you really look at this deck, it's very VV-centric, isn't it? Profs, Torch, Winter Night Stories, Steam Core Scholar, Fear of Missing Out, Tersa, these cards go in VV decks too. So interesting little shell to swap out some cards for, but apart from that, 23 lands in the deck. Not a whole lot, but again, we're drawing a ton of cards. 4 whole copies of Oscorp Industries and 4 Multiversal Passage for what that's worth. I think it is worth pointing out. That's a lot of those, but Oscorp Industries is a really interesting one here. We got a lot of ways to discard cards. So just discard Industries, pay your 2 life, you'll be fine. I promise. You got a bunch of 5/5 lifelink and demons coming your way in a turn or two. You'll be okay. But that's a neat inclusion to see a full 4 of. We all thought this would be a pretty powerful card. Looks like it is in this deck. We get to the sideboard and we've got kind of the normal stuff. We're a Grixis deck, so we play Abrade, we play Duress, we play Negate, Tragic Trajectory, Torch the Tower. All these things make perfect sense. Karsi Revenant is a good card to discard into our yard. Fantastic against the mono red aggro matchup. And then Preacher of the Schism is also very particularly good against mono red. And it's nice to be able to bring this in as a 5/5 flying lifelink death touch guy. Sometimes if it's in your yard. So all things considered, interesting sideboard. It's got some of the usual suspects, but a couple of spicy picks that I like too for the mono red matchup, so you don't die before you do what you're trying to do, basically. So cool deck that uses yet another new Spider-Man card. All of our new decks of the week use new Spider-Man cards. It's usually the goal for this video series. So let's move on to what we're calling Season of Lewis over here. Now this is it's called like Lewis something or other. I know his name is Luis on Through the Omenpaths, but on paper, this is called Moorland Devourer of Shadows. This is actually one of the cards that I was most excited about from this set, and tried to play like a mono blacklist on Arena for my last stream, and we just did not have a great night with it. I'm going to be honest with you, but we only got to cast it like once or twice. I feel like if you get to cast the card more often, it might be pretty good. But this is a shell that we've seen hide and hair from before, but hasn't done that much yet. A version of this deck did really, really well this week, and more people are talking about that deck all in all, I think. But it's very, very similar to this deck, and I kind of like this build a little bit more, but we'll talk about the differences between this and the other deck in just a second. This is going to play the Moorland Devourer of Spiders to catch you up against aggro and stuff like that, and it's just a good card to play once you have a bunch of mana. Ice-Till Explorer is still the backbone of this deck. This will get us a lot of mana very quickly, which is good with Moorland. Honest Rutstein is in here. This is kind of neat. We can grab, anything from our yard, whether it's an Ice-Till or a Moorland or just, a Disruptive Storm Brood. We'll get to that in a second. There's a lot of creatures with either ETB value or value that makes us have to sacrifice them. Like Insidious Fungus is in the deck, so we can get a fungus back with the Rutstein. That's kind of nice sometimes. Storm Brood is in here as a removal spell, but it's also a big creature. It's pretty nice. Damage Control Crew is in this deck. This, I kind of thought would be a decent card I did. I didn't think I would see it in the main deck of a best of 3 deck in week 1, but here we are, just a one of, kind of replacing things like Tranquil Frillback and, kind of a Elvish, Reclaimer. That's not the right. Elvish Reclaimer is a completely different card. Why can't I think of the name of the card right now? I've played it a billion times. It's 3 mana and it busts up stuff when it comes into play. You guys know what I'm talking about. A green creature that blows up artifacts and enchantments is kind of a time-honored tradition. But I wasn't sure the Damage Control crew would show up this quickly, but here it is. Kind of nice to see, even if it's just a one of. The same thing can be said for Sandman Shifting Scoundrel. Again, just a one of in this deck, but that makes plenty of sense. I don't think you'd want to play a bunch of copies of this card, but having one, again, makes sense. Sometimes you'll mill this somehow or discard it somehow, or it'll get into your yard, and then you just return it with its own activated ability a little bit later. It gives you a form of reach in the late game, especially against kind of grindy sort of decks. It gives you a whole lot of grind. I like that about it. It even ramps you when you use its ability. So altogether, no real keywords, but it's chump block proof, and that's kind of really important in this environment right now. So this might be better in some matchups than others, but I think that it's good enough in most matchups, and important ones at that, to be the one of in the deck. Town Greeter will also mill cards and get us the lands that we need. Llanowar Elves and Molt Tinder are 4 and 3 of respectively to get us, again, all the ramp that we need. And Molt Tinder will help us, mill cards from time to time as well. In the Sorcery Suite, this is where things kind of vary a little bit from other versions of this deck that I've seen. There's 4 Esper Origins, which is, more or less common between all brews of the deck. There's a Quag Feast, which is common, and there's a Season of Loss, which is common. 4 Season of Loss, which is common between all the brews of this deck. This last season started showing up, and I was really excited that Season of Loss had a place to be in Standard finally. I was really excited about this card when it came out, and it took it over a year to really do much of anything, but it's establishing its place in the format as, again, a piece of reach in the late game that can just knock the opponent out if you can resolve it. But it's also a sweeper some of the time in like panic situations. It's a card draw spell. There's a lot of things to like about SOL. But the real kind of way this deck breaks from the other decks like it is that a lot of other decks like it will play a 4 of Singularity Rupture from Edge of Eternities. In case you forgot what this is, it's the 6 mana Dimir sweeper that destroys all creatures, and then a player mills half of their library. So sometimes we'll target ourselves, it turns out, with that card, and then cast Season of Loss on the next turn for basically an auto win. But other times we will hit our opponent with a Singularity Rupture, which is just wild. But often you're going to hit yourself, I think, with the Singularity Rupture, so that you can mill half your deck, and then Season of Loss does, I don't know, 25 damage or whatever it is. There's 27 creatures in the deck, so it won't be that much, but you can often one-shot with Season after a Rupture, and usually you've cleared enough space to be able to do it with the Singularity Rupture. So I think it's actually a really neat way to take this deck, but I don't know that the deck necessarily has to do that. I like this build a good bit, right? It's got a bunch of creatures that can just win like a normal Magic deck. It's got a removal spell or two. It's got some decent ramp in it. It's got Moreland in the late game. It's got Season of Loss in the late game, so it's not like, if you add 4 Singularity Ruptures, at that point, you've got a lot invested in the late game. Like a lot invested in the late. It's a 6 mana card, dog. So, and I think that maybe some people just can't really stomach the idea of playing like 1 mana dorks and also sweepers. It just doesn't, there's something that doesn't compute with that. And I might be a little bit in that group, to be honest. So I don't think you have to play Rupture in the deck, but it is a neat piece that people are playing in this thing. Apart from that, let's look at the lands here. 24 lands. Wow. The requisite number of lands for a deck, including Conduit Pylons, letting us surveil stuff into our yard. That's pretty cool. We've got Bitter Triumph in here in the sideboard. Duress as well. Ghost Vacuum. It's in all the sideboards. Hollow Marauder. Interesting piece. We should have enough creatures in our yard to play this for really, really cheap, but I don't know what to play it against necessarily. Maybe Monowhite? Or not Monowhite. Blue-White control? Maybe. Nowhere to Run is in here against, hexproof creatures and such. Outrageous Robbery is, if you're not going to play Singularity Rupture, it makes sense to play Robbery a little bit in the sideboard. Again, against things like Blue-White, this gives us another dimension. I like that. Siege Ship Impact to blow up artifacts and enchantments. A Shoot the Sheriff for a little bit more removal, and an Urgent Necropsy for the same. We have plenty of ways to, or plenty of things we can collect evidence off of, so should be able to hit multiple targets with this. Altogether, just kind of Soul Tie, Trixie mid-range, and I think that the format should be, conducive to a deck like this. This isn't even Sultai. This is Golgari. I was thinking of Singularity Rupture builds. Yeah, this is just Golgari, kind of grindish, graveyard value, get to the late game and blow you out. Sorry, I dropped my pen. But I kind of like that. And I like that Moreland sort of, and Sandman, and Damage Control Crew, you know, kind of help put this deck over into continued prominence. But I think that's enough new cards to call it effectively a new deck, especially if you count the Singularity Rupture builds. We haven't really seen anything like that yet. But final deck we're going to look at today is Simic Jackal by, in this case, Air Vengeance. This took 9th in a standard challenge, but this has been tearing up League basically all week. I think like 5 different decks have League 5-0'd with this, and is amazingly, some of these decks that we've shown you recently here, these last 2 or 3 decks, which is the entire video so far, they were getting good results on, like, you know, the 25th of September, the 26th of September. This has continued to get results all the way until today, the day I'm speaking. So this deck is still in standard. You know, it hasn't dropped off whatsoever. If anything, it's getting more powerful as days go by. As the days go by. So what we're doing is playing Jackal, Genius Geneticist, or Drunith, Reviver of the Hive on Arena, in case you're wondering. Now, this will allow you to copy creatures, so long as you cast a creature spell with mana value equal to Jackal's power. So that's interesting. Every time you do that, he grows a little bit, so it becomes increasingly harder to do that. But as we speculated in the early season, the preseason here, it's all about whether it's worth it to play a curve full of mostly 1 and 2 drops. Maybe some 3s, a 4 here or there. They kind of threw this idea out the window, though, of playing like no 4 drops in this deck. That idea kind of got tossed a little bit by Air Vengeance and some of the other people playing it. We're playing 2 Enduring Curiosity and 4 Ouroboros. Now, this is kind of just the Ouroboros deck from last season, with Jackal kind of shoehorned in. But Jackal does a lot in this deck. We can copy Spyglass Sirens on turn 3, Paw Patch Recruits on turn 3 with the Offspring. That's kind of nice to get like 3 copies of Paw Patch Recruit. We've got Genomorph Imago in here to copy, and that's a good one to copy too. We've got Azure Beastbinder, a good one to copy. It's fantastic to copy this guy right now. And it's particularly good against like VV, Azure Beastbinder is. We've seen a lot of Dimir decks incorporate this card, mostly to help fight VV in the last couple of months. And so it makes sense to see it here. Copying it sounds crazy. Suruk Elusive Hunter, take advantage of all the removal in standard right now. So I kind of like that. But, you know, this is legendary. So I will say the copy's not legendary that you make. So making 2 copies of Suruk is wild. You know, that is really, really good. And once you've copied Suruk, then now you get a +1/+1 counter on Jackal, and it can copy Ouroboros. And if Jackal ever copies Ouroboros, that's game. That's game-ish. It's more or less done. It's really, really powerful if you can do that. But honestly, just copying your 1s and some of your 2s, good enough. Deck plays 11 total 1-drops, because I haven't even told you about the Lana Elves yet. But, you know, of course, you're playing that card in the deck. You want Ouroboros on turn 3, you know. But altogether, just a neat little Simic deck. I didn't get to talk about this last season. But last season, there was a wild graph that came out. It's really, really interesting, where it was like, you know, the density of certain decks in the format versus their win rate, and everything was kind of in line where you'd expect it. You know, like VV is the most played deck in the format. It has the 2nd highest win rate in the format. Dimir, 2nd most played deck in the format, 2nd highest win rate. Mono Red at the time, 3rd most played deck in the format, 3rd most deck played in the format, 4th highest winning deck. The most winning deck in terms of win percentage on MTGO last season was Simic Ouroboros. It was just very underrepresented, but the deck had darn near a 60% win percentage on MTGO last season. So it is kind of amazing that, especially after that graph came out, more people didn't adopt this deck. But now that the Jackal version has come along, a lot more people seem to be adopting it. It's, you know, burning through League pretty good in these last couple of days. So don't be surprised if you see this deck more and more as time goes on. As far as instants go, we got Bounce Off in here for some tempo, and Snakeskin Veil to make sure we can protect our important creatures, Jackal or Ouroboros, whatever. Enduring Curiosity, right? Just going to blaze past the lands. 23 of those, including Starting Town and Restless Finestalk, of course. And then when we get to the sideboard, we've got Annul to counter, enchantments and Soul Cauldrons and stuff. Bounce Off as a 4th copy. Heritage Reclamation to blow up artifacts and enchantments, and also, mess around in graveyards. Keen-Eyed Curator to mess around in graveyards. It's really important to do that right now. Dishonest Tidebinder to counter, Soul Cauldron triggers, and now they can't use it while this is out. Unable to Scream as a 4 of, again, combats VV really well, and a bunch of other creatures in the format too. Scavenging Ooze to mess around in graveyards, and then Repulsive Mutation as a counterspell. Usually you see a fair number of counterspells in blue sideboards, but between the 1 Annul, after the 1 Annul, it's just 2 Repulsive Mutation, but it's fantastic in this deck. If you can somehow pull off Repulsive Mutation and put counters on Ouroboros, or Repulsive Mutation, put 1 counter on Jackal, so now you can copy Ouroboros when you play it. Like, there's really good plays with Mutation in this deck. So altogether, kind of simple, but we've got good tempo spells in this deck. We've got good quick creatures. We get on board very fast. We can draw a bunch of cards off Curiosity, or just put the game out of reach with the Ouroboros. Punish them for playing removal spells with Suric. There's a lot too. This deck, it's not quite Simic tempo, but it is Simic with more options than it's had in a long time. Azure Beastbinder, not a removal spell, but next best thing. Enduring Curiosity, not a card draw spell, next best thing. Ouroboros, not technically reach, but next best thing. We've got explosive ways to get onto the table with Jackal and Paw Patch Recruit and all these 1-drops. So altogether, another aggro deck that played just like the Monowhite deck that opened the video. An aggro deck that plays a lot of creatures but also draws a lot of cards, right? I think that's kind of important to note. Seeing a lot of that in Magic lately, because that's in some ways what VV is too, when you really think about it, especially the creature-heavy versions of VV. But that is it for this week. We'll see if we can find any more new decks in a week's time, but a pretty exciting little turnaround. We didn't see anything brand spanking new necessarily. This is a take on Ouroboros. We've seen, the Season of Lost deck. We've seen the Monowhite lifegain deck, and we've seen the Grixis Reanimator deck with Ardyn. But we haven't seen these precise versions, and I think that a lot of the cards from Spider-Man that we got that are in these decks really helped kind of kick them up a notch and push them even more towards prominence and standard. So I thought they were worth bringing up. But that's all I've got for this one, and I am running late on time. That is a long video, and I apologize for that. But there's a lot to talk about, right? I didn't expect that to be the case in Spider-Man Standard, but that's where we are right now. So let me know your thoughts, feelings, and emotions in the comments section, and I will catch you cats later. I'm Deb from The Place. Thanks for watching, Wizards. Spread love, and be kind.